Hello everyone. Let me try to adjust that camera a little bit. Yeah, whatever. It works for now. Alright everyone, I'm Talisman Skulls, Arc Warlock, and I'm doing a short little video here on separating fact from fiction pertaining to the specific subject matter of seed. This is only going to be a 15-minute long video because for whatever reason why, YouTube doesn't allow longer. Oh well. So, here's how it goes. Look up the word Sidu, change the U to an R, S-I-D-U or S-I-D-R. You can add an E in front of the I. You can change the D to a DTH symbol, which is that funny little curly upright with a slant through it that looks like a D, but it's got like a little cross on the top. And would be pronounced dit, as in width. Anyway, so what is seed or seedcraft? It simply means customary craft. And it entails both the things of the religious, spiritual, ceremonial practices and everything else, to the social codes, conducts, rules, regulations, politics, civil laws, and all that stuff on the so-called secular civil end of things. So it encompassed both, and it ranged also from the very common people's practices of making clothing, types of food they made, the songs that they sung, the folk songs, folklore, folk festivals, celebrations, holidays, the various arts and crafts related to those, to shipbuilding, to farming, all of it. Every single thing as you identify as part of culture is what seedcraft is. It is all of it. And that's one of the reasons why when you look into older traditions and cultures, they don't actually have a word for their religious beliefs as something separate over here, but they didn't live in a theocracy either. Sure, the things interacted and influenced each other, but that's the difference between a dogmatic culture and a spiritually minded one. They weren't always spiritually minded when certain situations came up, but it ultimately came together and was codified as Sidu, or seed. And so a term for a traditionalist, or a man who was a traditionalist, was a seedman or seedware, or seedwar. And the term for a woman was a Seidr, seedkolana, or seed woman. And it's really that simple. And again, it just means a traditionalist, a person who has a traditional way of doing things. And we haven't lost as much as so-called neo-pagans, so-called Wiccans, whose spell it W-I-C-C-A is actually pronounced Wicca, by the way. So, sorry, but you guys look like idiots to people who have actually done research and not just studied your crap. But anywho, in any case, you get a bunch of crap where people say that, you know, seed or Sidu is an Old Norse term for a type of sorcery that was practiced by the Norse society during the late Scandinavian Iron Age or whatever. That is modern bullshit, okay? Others try to say the word Gald or Gelder were terms for that. And that is actually a source of the modern word gold. Alright, as in the metal, as in the color, okay? People talk about, well, the Galderbuch is a, Galderbuch is a book on magic and sorcery. Yeah, it was created out of shit like the, what was that? The Ars Goetia, okay? And trying to slap some other crap mixed in with it. But it's a much later creation around the 1800s. It's not ancient, traditional, cultural, anything. It's bullshit. Others will try to say that seedcraft was the craft practiced by the older race of the Vanir. Again, Catholic-trained Snorri Sturluson wrote that in the Eddas, who also at one point said that Thor was the son of Odin, but then came up with the other alternative prior to that, that Thor was actually the great-great-great-granddaddy from the city of Troy as an ancestor of Odin. So there's a few of many of the nonsense examples of bullshit, aside from what's generally accepted. But anyway, Seed wasn't practiced by the Vanir and then taught to the Aesir because of some very key factors of the word Vanir. Vanir means beings. It's a plural from Vain, or Van, and again means being. You see, the older forms of it include simply the word Ve, which means a power of a being, an essence, a life force. It's a general term, very similar to the concept of Kami in Shintoism, K-A-M-I. But in this linguistic source, it's a very animistic sense of when it's referring to beings as souls. The forms of that evolved into several different branches that we have today that people keep all this separated bullshit to keep you from knowing the reality of it. And that was also part of Seed, that's the customary knowledge of these beliefs. Traditional beliefs, if you will. But anyway, they in itself, as a concept within the old Sidu, or seed, is the same as the word way, which means being, they, which means being, or fe, which means being, with the W, V, and H being exchanged all the way down into modern English. It's that simple. Then when you got the form being rendered as Vanir, Vatir, Vates, Fates, Waits, Whites, so on and so forth, it's later that the word arg, or argi, which meant coward or cowardly, very literally, had nothing to do with effeminacy. When it meant unmanliness, it didn't have any homosexual reference, as people try to pitch. That's bullshit. It meant somebody who was a coward, somebody who couldn't face somebody in battle. But it's also the same word source as the word eerie, which was later tied to fe ari, or fe argi, or ve argi, to try and say that these were timid spirits, so as to try and paint that the beliefs of the people are obviously inferior to the new religion in front of the monotheistic idea of divinity and those superior angelic beings, when in reality they're pretty much the same fucking thing in context. But hey, that was the kind of propaganda that was tried to play to convert people over. While others actually brought their traditions with them, nobody stole anything. So that's one of the things you got to get your head wrapped around and get past the bullshit that's modern. People will try to throw in the term spaycraft and say that, that was a practice of women and they were called spays. No, that term spay means a fucking spy. Spycraft included everything from changing appearance to cross-dressing to committing assassinations through poisoning and so on and so forth. It was a very popular way of knocking off a royal at the time. So being called a spay had the context of being called a traitor. That's really that simple, being called a spy, as an act of treason against church and crown, or what we would call today church and state. The term vulva is not an alternative to a Sidkona or traditionalist woman, because vulva itself comes from the word to revolve or to spin. And the actual language source for a spinning woman, as in person who literally spins threads, was called a spinster, stir being the word for a woman, and literally meant spinning woman, a woman who spins fibers. The ones that then actually did the weaving were called wifen or wifen, which is where the word wife comes from. And the ones that were to cut out the cloth that would later be taken over to the seamster or seamstress were called the skerja, or skurja, which is spelled S-K-E-R-J-A, or just an A at the end without the J or the Y, and literally means shearing, or a shearing woman, as in literal shears for cutting cloth. So there was actually 4 different women involved with the process of producing the textiles. And that's really where it comes down to. So this term vulva is actually Latin. Like I said, it didn't come about until the 1800s. But that's the kind of examples of generalizations. Wizard as a term didn't evolve until about the 1500s, and is much later than either warlock or witch. So those who try to bounce that around are pretty much shooting themselves in the foot. The term witch doctor was actually applied not as a practitioner of Seidr, but as a person whose job was specifically to find the evil female witches that were putting spells on everybody. It was an alternative term for a witch hunter, and was actually invented by Francis Hitchinson in the 1800s, no less, or 1700s, excuse me, 1718, I believe. In any case, as a term for basically quack doctors, liars, and everything else that claimed that they couldn't heal somebody because their placebos weren't working, so they threw out there the claim that it must be witchcraft, a witch's craft. A witch did the poisoning, so only she knows how to cure it. So we've got to go find the bad witch, and if she doesn't show us how to cure it, then we'll have to execute her to break the bad magic. And that's pretty much what that kind of shit was going on at the time, that people have completely warped, twisted, and fucked over everybody on what the different things actually mean. The thing is, when it comes to the term Seiðr, it actually comes from the word es or os, and means us or ours. And it was a term meaning ancestors. This was also well known, and even Snorri Sturluson kind of admitted that, and those who have actually studied the subject knows that the term Seiðr was invented as a word meaning ancestors, and they themselves were a type of way or fae, being spirits of the dead. And the term for the elevated ones that were recognized by the people before the Catholic Church took it over in about the 10th century, or started taking it over in the 10th century with the whole saint crap. It wasn't that rigidly defined, and it was anybody that was considered worthy of being remembered and thought to still be blessing the people after their death and burial in those old mounds. Especially kings and whatever were thought to still benefit the land in which they were buried. And so they were called Haligan, Holy One, or Haligar, or Haligja, or Haligdar. And these are plurals for holy man, holy women, or holy man or holy woman, with the feminine JA put at the end instead of AN, or YA, or YAR, and so on. So you have to really be careful about that, and a lot of people intentionally hope that the majority of people will not understand this so that they can pitch all their various warped, twisted bullshit and everything else. And that's the understanding of what a spinster is where the term about binding and spinning cords actually comes from, because they're threads. That's it. That's all it is. Seedcraft are customary practices or crafts that are not specifically supernatural, they're not specifically religious, they are everything from social political customs between rulers and how they greet each other, or how people are welcomed in the country, to whether or not you're supposed to remove your shoes before entering a house, to custom of offering a drink and a smoke to a person in a business meeting, which used to be something that was very common in the 1950s. Like if you asked for, a drink, it was considered a little bit of a trick, but it was okay to accept the smoke. Things like that. All right, culture has changed a bit since then, obviously. But a lot of the things that has been spun around today and claimed is all modern bullshit and has no basis in this actual history. It has nothing to do with seedcraft. In any case, from the 14th century on, when women themselves were considered the only ones that were preserving the old customs, it became considered a woman's craft, and thus witch's craft, and hence witchcraft and seedcraft became merged synonymously and falsely after it was considered warlocks were rare at best. Talisman Skulls, peace out, take care. That's what seedcraft is. It's the old Volktalu, Wolktalu, folk tale, folklore, traditions, customs, and beliefs of the people.